All right, well, hello and welcome to the latest webinar series by Upstream Intelligence. Upstream Oil and Gas combats COVID-19 and the 2020 oil price crash, brought to you by Reuters Events. My name is Jade Waters. I work as an analyst at Reuters Events, as well as being this year's project director for the Data-Driven Drilling and Production Conference, which will now be taking place virtually later this year in October. This is the first episode in the three-part series and is just one of several pieces of work we'll be doing to promote the industry and the key issues within it. There are over 900 of you signed up today, so thank you so much for the great response. And thank you, of course, to our panelists for their time. Just a brief bit of housekeeping before we begin. This session will be an hour long and is being recorded, so we will send you the full recordings and the presentations within a week or so. So, Episode 1 today, we'll be looking at how you can drive short-term efficiencies and draw maximum revenue from your operations. We'll be exploring why digital is no longer the expensive add-on, but the business-saving essential, and how to drive the most value from your existing wells and facilities in a low oil price environment without too many additional costs. Providing the offshore perspective is Dave Hartell, who is Executive Vice President of Operations and Production at New Age Limited. And over in the onshore corner, we have Rick O'Brien, who is Project Manager of Digital Transformation at Marathon Oil. Tying the two sides together today, and of course, our chair is the wonderful Jim Claunch, who is Senior Advisor at Bain and Company. If at any point you want to ask the panelists a question, you can simply enter this into the text box and we will try and address it in the Q&A at the end. Okay, so I think that's enough from me. It's time to hand over to our chair. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Jade. I've spoken at a lot of these conferences, and Rick and Dave, I think you can confirm I have never been called wonderful before. So thank you very much, Jade. I appreciate that a lot. So I think just for a little bit of contextual framing this morning, obviously we all know about the 2020 oil price crash, and we are all living in the middle of COVID-19 and some states reopening and companies beginning to think about going to the office. And yet, in many cases, people I talk to that are going back to the office, the reasoning behind going back to the office is because we've always gone to the office. And I think what we've learned through COVID-19 and work from home is that the world has changed a great deal in the last 3 to 5 years in terms of digital technologies that both allow us to work from home, to work from anywhere, but that also enable our oil field. And I think it's critical in today as we look at the technologies, it is absolutely clear that digital is the game changer that we've been talking about for a long while. And so, Dave, I'm going to throw it over to you and let you talk about some of the offshore sides. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Jim. Greetings. Today, I'm going to talk about one particular aspect of digital transformation that can help some assets achieve better short-term efficiencies. I'm going to talk about digital twins, driving efficiency from our offshore oil and gas facilities. Digital twin has been defined as a virtual representation of an asset used from early design through building and operation, maintained and easily accessible throughout its life cycle. Probably people have aspects of their engineering that they currently use. Maybe they don't call it a digital twin, but digital twins are able to be used during design and operation of offshore oil and gas facilities to improve safety, reliability, operability, and maintainability. But if you ask a number of people, you might get a lot of different definitions of a digital twin. So I've sort of broken this into 3 different types of digital twins: a data digital twin, a process digital twin, and a physical digital twin. A lot of data is already available, and it's constantly being produced from the start of a design phase through all the engineering, procurement, construction, testing, pre-commissioning, all into startup and operations. But it's not being handled very well. McKinsey says 99% of our data isn't even properly used. So we need to contextualize this data and make it more accessible to all the users throughout the life cycle. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Process simulations, those are well known. Those are available in the early design phases, but sometimes they're not properly used then to be extended. You can add control system emulation. You can use them for training. You can extend them out into operations. So they need to be better used, preserved, and expanded. Physical simulations, these are used, like, for example, by structural engineers and naval architects. They are already being used during engineering design phases, but they need to also be preserved and expanded to save a lot of costs later in the life cycle of a facility. So we need to look at these things holistically across the whole life cycle. We want to make decisions based on insights that comes from models in the engineering design phases, but then helping us make better decisions from data analytics during operations. And something that has been found is sometimes these things are kept in silos. We need subsurface linked, for example, through to subsea to surface facilities. The teams have to be linked, the models have to be linked, and the data should be linked, not segregated. We want them to link across the entire development and start early. Digital twins facilitate better engineering analysis and design. For example, not keeping the process design separate from the control system, but linked together. And then when we use them for operations, we'll more easily stay within integrity operating windows, which will help us have safer operations and extend the maintenance life of some of our equipment. Maintenance, Emerson claims that 70 to 80% of maintenance is done incorrectly, the wrong time, too early, unnecessarily. So doing the right maintenance at the right time, performed in the right way, is a good outcome of using digital twins properly. So more efficiency comes from increased reliability, more optimized operations, and reduced maintenance costs. All these components are already available, but they're not properly being connected. And if teams did this, we can get these efficiencies now. And the overall increase in value comes from production increases. It's been estimated that 6 to 8% more could come out of a reservoir. More reliable ramp up to plateau, longer on plateau, and reduced decline. So these are significant increases in value that could be available to existing assets. A data digital twin starts as a collection of engineering, design, manufacturing, construction, and test data. It starts with a 3D CAD model or a 3D point cloud from a laser scanning. It can include manufacturing drawings, instructional videos, and all this can be visualized through virtual reality and augmented reality tools. This slide shows an example of a 3D CAD model where the user has selected a pump there in purple, and then a little window would pop out with all the contextualized data. So the vendor test data, what kind of spare parts we have, what kind of tools are needed to do maintenance, how to do maintenance, and then even on into live process data. So it's a very powerful tool. A process digital twin, very common for engineers, a dynamic simulation process model. It's a mathematical model that would have all the details of the equipment, the flow streams going through, all the data on equipment, the pump curves, the valve closing times, all the instrumentation, all that goes together. And this is normally used for engineering design, but using it properly and expanding it and using it through the life of an asset will let let operating teams have better operational settings, tweaking those to extract the most value, stay inside integrity operating windows, and this results in better maintenance, extends maintenance intervals, so you don't have to do maintenance unnecessarily. The physical digital twin then is used, for example, here in structural and naval architecture uses. A floating facility like an FPSO or a semi-submersible or a TLP would be subject to mid-ocean conditions, wind, wave, and current. And as the thing moves, it would have forces, stresses, strains, fatigue. So in the beginning, in the design phase, teams would be very commonly using these models with theoretical mid-ocean sea states, but we actually have the ability to instrument these facilities and measure in real time and keep these updated and through our analyses packages and predict stresses and strains and fatigue, so we can generate optimized inspection planning, what critical elements should be inspected and when you might predict some things. This has the ability to significantly reduce field inspection times and significant savings in maintenance costs. So all these systems all sort of link together. If you tried to put everything on one slide here, but if you start in the upper left-hand corner with the original engineering simulators, the dynamic process simulations, when you add the control systems into this, you're going to do a better design. Sometimes we get out in the field and teams in the past have spent 1 or 2 or 3 months getting control systems tuned. Well, this way, by linking these together early on, we're going to save that kind of time. And by having these models prepared early, we can then use them in something called an operational training system, which is quite powerful. You're able to check a lot of safety scenarios, sometimes scenarios that weren't necessarily captured in the original design. So you're getting things more correct the first time. And the crews that you train, whether these are on land or offshore, the crews bring a lot of experience and knowledge and will help debug anything in the control system that maybe wasn't exactly right from the design phase. And then finally, in parallel, we have subsurface data that's being worked by the subsurface teams into a subsurface digital twin, structural models, the stratigraphic models, geological models, reservoir gridding, upscaling, well configurations, flow simulations, production model, all that. Then when it's linked into these, the simulation of the facilities is called an integrated asset model. We have our actual wells and we can check various scenarios for production. We're going to get this all better tuned, ready for the start of a quicker start of actual field production, smoother, get up to plateau. But we're also going to be then monitoring the performance. So as field IoT data comes in, the physical readings from whether it's subsurface gauges, subsea, surface facilities, we're going to monitor their performance. So we'll be tuning our digital models, but we'll also be looking for signs of degradation over the life. So if you have an existing facility and start having a longer time, more pressure drops or longer to close valves, you'll start seeing some early signs of this. You might also see that as your production fluids subtly change or pressures, water cuts, things like that, that you want to tune your operational settings to get to extract more hydrocarbons quicker. And all this data is continuously feeding back into the data digital twin. A data digital twin can be linked to your enterprise asset management tools, your asset performance models, to make sure that we're having the right spares in the right place, the right competency of our teams ready to do maintenance, predictive maintenance. Instead of just reacting, we're being able to be proactive. So all this feeds back into the cloud data platform and goes back through the cycle again. So this is a particular tool, digital transformation tool, that's being used right now for significant improvements in the efficiency of offshore oil and gas developments. So I'd like to hand over to Rick right now to show sort of a larger view on the onshore side.
Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here from very hot Houston, Texas. If you've heard me talk before, I tend to really focus more on the operational production side of digital oil field versus such a technical bent. So I'm going to actually walk you through some of the different things that Marathon's been working on over the last 6 months. Marathon has 4 basins in the unconventional play, so we have been quite impacted by the drop in oil prices, and are working on things to help improve our business in tight times. So I'm going to just share a lot of our practical tips with you over the next 10 or 15 minutes. So first of all, I wanted to share some quantifiable benefits. One of the Jade said, is digital oil field gone from beyond a luxury to a business vital tool? And in Marathon's case, the answer is absolutely yes. I'm showing you some of our successes over the last years, and at our quarterly earnings call about 2 weeks ago, our executive management team actually lauded to the investor community how important digital oil field is going to be to our future success during this downturn. Our ability to manage our fields remotely, our ability to quickly turn wells on and off as we're dealing with marketing constraints, are all things that they view as business vital to the company. And the fact we've made a good solid investment in digital oil field capabilities over the last 3 or 4 years is absolutely paying value to the company. As I say, it's the gift that keeps on giving as well. As you see highlighted in red, we also announced at the quarterly review that we had achieved our lowest quarterly operational costs since we were independent for the last 4 years. And while that's certainly not fully attributable to digital oil field, it's a vital part of our ability to run our business on a lower and lower basis. And quite frankly, it's also allowed us to be able to do more with physical distancing. Our control centers can do a lot of stuff now where you don't have to get people together and deal with some of those issues. The other thing I would point out on this slide, people ask, well, how did Marathon sell this to our business leadership? If you notice, every one of those bullet points is really operationally related. So we sold digital oil field on either we're going to get you more barrels through reducing deferred, optimizing our wells, or being able to manage our field costs, particularly our personnel. And what you see there is we've been able to significantly reduce our field force by using various tools and techniques. All right, so this is my world. I have DOF stuff, but no new money. So what are some of the things we're doing right now to successfully work? And the first thing we've done that we literally just finished is we did what we call the asset automation health check. So we've invested a lot of money over the last 3 or 4 years in automation. So let's go back and see how it's actually working. And so we literally went back to our SCADA screens and had a team go back and review. First of all, is the automation still even turned on? If it's turned on, is it actually functioning as designed? And then we hooked that up. And so we identified a lot of opportunities, particularly gas freezing has been a big problem for us in 3 of our assets that have a combination of winter and summer in the winter months. And so we've quickly identified quite a few wells that we could do something with differently, not only now, but also going into next winter as ways to reduce our costs, increase our gas optimization. And the next thing we looked at was, well, if the well shut down, if we used automation to prevent it from shutting down and just choked it back with the auto chokes, how many trip visits we avoid and how much will we save? And as you can see, we very, very conservatively actually estimated there's almost 100,000 barrel of oil equivalent, plus the avoidance of over 300 site visits, just by using the automation as a tool to manage the wells versus it automatically tripping into ESD mode. And then finally, we looked at one of the things we're discovering with automation is individual well pads. You may have 6 or 7 wells in that pad, and sometimes they each well being individually tuned will actually lessen the overall whole of automation and productivity coming off that well. So we've actually been looking at ways to automate automation. We'll talk a little more about one of our pilots with a company called Crux OCM, where we're actually saying, could you automate the field, which also is a benefit because you just don't have enough people to go around constantly optimizing our different field benefits. And our conservative value case on that is it's 400,000 barrels. So what you really are seeing, even in tough times, you have no new money for new stuff. Go out and look at your equipment and see, are we really getting the value we could get out of it today? And that's typically, you can do that with your existing resources. There's not a lot of new investment there, and you're able to find some pretty good opportunities. And then also find out maybe where you've got some challenge areas where you don't have maybe as many resources as you did before, and where you've got some potential challenges. So the second thing we also talked about is we went back and we're starting to look at our processes again. So reviewing processes is free with your existing staff. So we're going back and saying, well, there's some processes that maybe some people have left and they've stopped running, and you're like, wow, nobody's missing them. Let's get rid of them forever. And then conversely, there may be other processes where maybe some of your people are gone and there's some really important things happening. Like all of a sudden you've forgotten that you've got a compressor PM maintenance cycle and you still have to do compressor PMs, but those processes maybe are not as efficient as they used to be. So another thing you can do during the slow time is really go back and look at your core business processes and find out, are there other things you could be doing to help further improve them? And also look at how some of your tools are being utilized to handle that as well. So I don't have DOF stuff. So Jim and I have been trying to warn you for the last 4 years that you really need DOF stuff if you're going to really make a good value proposition for your company. And I know it's been hard for some companies, particularly because DOF can be pretty expensive. So some of the things that we would recommend is you don't have to have a lot of fancy tools to still take advantage of some of the DOF philosophies and ways to do business. One of the most critical business successes for us actually started as a software-based tool, as an Excel-based tool, where one of our assets was using that to track their well visits. Well, why you go to a well and how often you're going is a huge piece of information to improve your digital oil field effectiveness. You don't have to have a fancy tools kit to do that. It certainly helps, but just knowing why your people are going places is something as simple as building an Excel spreadsheet. Again, even if you don't have a lot of DOF stuff, review your work processes. If you have DOF, you may have DOF and you also don't realize it. Doug Johnson will tell you all the different things you can learn just from having a pressure gauge on a well, and being able to even track that again on a spreadsheet if you don't have fancier tools is something that's certainly possible today without that big investment. And I think more importantly, as more and more evidence becomes available about how great DOF has been in helping businesses through the coming months, go ahead and work on continuing to invest, educate yourself and your company, so that when you are ready to come out of this on the other side, you've got the business case prepared and you're actually have management aligned to how this could help you become much more successful going forward. At the early days, Marathon certainly has been very supportive, but now seeing that payback at this time has really been a significant benefit to the company. And the next slide is going to talk about, I might have a little bit of money, so but I can't afford all that money for a well. What are some things I could do to maybe to use some stuff? And I'm going to talk about several different pretty cool IoT-based things that Marathon has been exploring. So this first one is a tank level sensor. So we inherited a lot of wells in the Permian that had literally no equipment on them, not even a high shutoff. And so we were going to have to visit these wells. We're producing 20 or 30 barrels a day literally every day. So we've been working with a company called Sensor Field, and that little bread box thing, not even a bread box circled in red, is actually a tank level sensor. Cost us about $700. That graph on the right is showing you we actually compared it at one of our tank radar gauge batteries. And as you can see, it is literally the exact same quality as that particular device. And we've been able to cut visits to this location from daily, literally down to a couple of times per month. And so you start translating that into 50 or 60 wells, and you're literally paying for contractors pretty quickly with these kind of devices. The next device I'm going to talk about is something we've been working on with Twinio Consulting. It's actually a remote mounted camera, which is completely autonomous. So it's got its own power system, it's got its own radio, it's got connectivity, so you can move it around. One of the problems with cameras is sometimes if you get them on a pad and you put the pole in the wrong place, you're stuck with that location. Well, this one you can hook it to a truck and pull it 5 feet to the left. If you sell that well, or that well's productivity is so low you don't care about it anymore, you can put it on the back of a pickup truck and drag it somewhere else. Interestingly, we put thermal cameras on a couple of them. That truck you see to the right, we actually were able to watch that truck fill up. And that truck driver claimed he'd taken 180 barrels and the truck only filled up halfway. So we were able to basically almost pay for that camera on the first day by catching a trucker who was trying to cheat us out of half a load of oil. So there's a lot of things you can do with these cameras to, again, eliminate site visits. We're actually in Permian in the midst of fully automating 2 of our routes, which will be very limited operator drive-bys. We're hoping maybe only twice a month. And so again, you start multiplying that. In the Permian, we've talked about $150 a visit is a way to quantify the value proposition of that. So you start talking about eliminating 20 visits a month, you're at $3,000 of contractor savings very quickly. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and what Marathon has been looking at pretty hard of lately, is this whole concept of automating the automation. And what that really means is when we had dozens of wells, our control centers and our production techs could keep up with managing the wells. But as we have gotten into hundreds of wells, one of the things the automation health check told us was even though the automation set points may be correct for a period of time, as shale wells play down, obviously their dynamics change, and you need to be continually tuning your automation equipment to maximize your optimization. It's kind of like if you've ever sailed in a sailboat, to maintain the maximum speed, you have to constantly be trimming and adjusting your sails with little trim tabs. Automation really is that same way. And the second thing we noticed that I mentioned earlier is a technician might be optimizing one well, and there's 4 other wells on that pad, that when he optimizes that well, it may change the dynamics of the flow coming out of or off the pad, which actually sub-optimizes the wells. That's particularly true with compression, and also if you're having marketing constraints. We also think there's a pretty good business opportunity to think about if you can only pump 80% of the gas off the well. All 4 of those wells might have different GORs. You really should be pumping the one with the highest GOR to get as much oil off that well as possible while maximizing your gas constraints. So really complex concept. We've been actually working with a company called Crux OCM, which is predominantly been a midstream and downstream company for control centers, to figure out if we could convert that software into well pad management software where you would literally control the valves similar to the way you control valves in a downstream environment. It's early days yet, but we threw that 400,000 barrel number out there. I would tell you that's an outrageously conservative estimate on what the true value to that most likely is. And the reality of not having enough people to continually modify thousands of wells means the only way you're going to really maximize the value of your DOF investment is to figure out a way to have that computer, which runs 24/7, 365, doing that work for you. So that's where we're at right now. Hopefully some of those tips and tricks were useful for somebody out there. And I'm going to now push it on to Mr. Claunch.
Thank you, Rick. Not only do they work 24/7, 365, they don't drink bourbon, they don't wake up hungover, they don't bring any baggage to the equation. So I think there are tremendous advantages to what you're talking about. Now, Rick and Dave talked about this like it's really simple from an organizational perspective, but you really have to look at this from a people, technology, and process perspective. And so obviously culture matters, right? I mean, we can talk about this technology all day, but at the end of the day, it boils down to your company's technology and its leadership, and do they really believe, and are they taking actions that allow you to drive the value with digital? So when you think about what you heard from Dave and Rick, it begins with value and not data. You're going to hear me talk in a moment about the importance of data and how we need to look at data. But what's interesting is the value created, and even for Rick to say 400,000 barrels of oil is a low estimate, that is a lot of money that is driven by digital. The other thing I would say is, systems and technology in the past were really questions that were answered and driven by the CIO of companies. But when you listen to what Dave and Rick had to say, in reality, the systems and technologies were CEO decisions or COO decisions because they're driving the business. The next thing I would say is
traditional operating models are inhibitors, and I can guarantee you that most of you out there that have had to implement digital technologies have run into operating models getting in your way. Dave talked about data in silos. Well, hell, the organization is in silos. And so when Dave starts trying to build a digital twin across those silos, he's running into line managers saying, no, 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 that's my silo is here. You got to get my approval, rather than having an operating model that allows us to think along the value chain and how we make money. And then the last thing, culture matters more than ever. And I want to talk a little bit about back to work and back to office, right? As I mentioned earlier, the culture of allowing people to work from home or work from where they have connectivity is critical, because it's not a technology matter anymore. It doesn't matter whether you're using Microsoft Teams or you're using GoToMeeting or you're using Zoom or whatever technology it is that you use to enable employees and leadership to work from home. It works. It works. We've proven it works. And so to now not have leadership that's behind that type of thinking and that type of running the business, it makes no sense. So enablers or disablers, we've invested in, I call the enablers data and analytics, right? But if you've got data that's just viewed down silos, you have a problem, right? And if it's internal data only, you have a challenge. And in some cases, I've seen siloed data is actually down to an engineer's PC. Have you seen that before, Rick, that it was siloed down to an engineer's PC?
Or a laptop, yep.
Yeah, or laptop, right? So, we're moving, that's so 20th century, right? And now where we need to be, if it's going to be an enabler, is you have a single view of data, a single, right? Where fewer and fewer times you hear Excel as a single version of the truth, because that is just not the way that like the value that Rick's getting and the value that Dave is getting. It's not coming from Excel anymore. Technologies, we do need a flexible infrastructure, and technology function as an innovation agent. I think the challenge on IT organizations has never been larger. To be part of a business and not part of a service level agreement to the business is a big difference. It's a very big difference. But the opportunity for IT to create value has never been larger. Now, when it comes to operating model and partnerships, I know when you see nimble structure to encourage innovation, a lot of times in many of our companies in the oil and gas world, we do not associate the word nimble with our culture. And what in the digital world, what we need, and some of the work that has gone very, very well is empowered teams enabled by digital and data, and letting those closer to where work gets done actually make the decisions and implement. And when we talk about active ecosystem engagement, what we're talking about is, used to in the past, we thought we had to, well, frankly, some companies still believe that. The truth is, there's a lot of competencies out there. There's a lot of capabilities and knowledge out there that, frankly, it probably makes more sense for try to hire and retain. And so the ability of our companies to be able to find the right capability and competency, partner with it to deliver business outcomes has never been higher. What from a talent and culture perspective, collaboration and experimentation, even in my previous life, I got to where I didn't talk about failure. I know you guys have heard about fail fast. There's a connotation within oil and gas that no, fail fast, no, because lives are at risk, et cetera, et cetera. All very, very true. I'm a believer that digital actually protects people. It mitigates risk for people. So the point here is, if you're going to be delivering and experimenting, you're talking about 2 to 3 week sprints of work. So it's okay to say, hey, I either don't have the data I need to automate this or to create the model that we need. It's okay to say, we can't do that. We didn't get the results that we expected, so let's try something else. It doesn't mean you're failing on this mass scale. It's just you have to be willing to experiment. And cross-functional teaming, I want to use the word teaming, is super critical, because I mentioned earlier, we make money along the value chain, and yet we tend to solve problems vertically in micro silos. And so as we begin to optimize things along the value chain, whether it's leveraging midstream data to optimize production, or looking at production data and maintenance together, data together to minimize visits to onshore wells, for example, we're going to see more cross-functional teaming. We're going to see teams that in the past would not have had digital resources. In fact, in many cases, that's been happening for a couple of years. And I think Marathon's a great example of that. Next slide. Data is the new gold. And I want to talk about it's not that data is the new gold, it's what you do with it. Right? So what becomes very important is that you do have a single version of the truth. You recognize that the IT department is not the one accountable for the quality of the data, nor the work processes that create the data. And so always focusing on outcomes. And even if you look at a work process, when you get to the end of the process, you know there's certain decisions that can be made. So be thinking from the very beginning, what are the data elements I'm going to need at the end of this process to make the decision? What's the system of record? What's the quality of the data? And then as you've done that, you have got data that you can count on. That's part of the single version of the truth. So approaching data bit by bit by bit is a very critical success factor in my mind. And again, focusing on business outcomes as the result of leveraging data that is in a single place, single source of the truth, and not an engineer's laptop. And I'm not picking on engineers. I'm just saying I've seen that in my previous slide. Agile ways of working, and I want to talk about this not in the traditional sense of agile, but because that is applicable as well. But I want to talk about new ways of working, which is more and more and more multidisciplinary teams looking to solve business outcomes. So if you listen to what Dave described in the digital twin, it's many disciplines of engineers that are required to build digital twins. Am I right, Dave?
That's correct.
So so getting these people together, rather than one engineer work on their little piece, another engineer work on their little piece, another engineer work on their little piece, and then throw it all over the fence to one another, actually having people sit down and talk about it makes a big difference in the overall outcome. Because I have found so many times that people have had no idea the work they were doing and the impact it had on others. And so multidiscipline is going to be more and more. Diversity and inclusion in oil and gas, forever we have measured it in gender. Right? Rick, Dave is that what, I guarantee you we have diversity metrics that we call diversity and inclusion. I think that's changing. And I think it's changing based on generation as much as anything else, right? I mean, as we have different generations coming into the workforce, what motivates them, what inspires them is very different. As we have digital capabilities entering into operations, and we're different. And it's so important that we have leadership that knows how to lead all of those groups. It's so critical, and that's just not a given. The last thing I'm going to say is this takes bold leadership. It takes commitment. It takes bold leadership. And as companies roll out digital and people change companies, or some of our brain power leaves the industry, we need to be moving towards a workforce of the future and new ways of working, and not allow us to fall back to traditional ways. And that's very, very easy to do. It's surprisingly easy to do. So always being thoughtful of, how am I going to run my operation in the future? What are the competencies that I'm going to need? And then again, as part of the leadership, where do these people work from? Do they have to be in the office? Do they have to be in the field? And what does that do to how our company works, operates, thinks, is known for? Because that is so key, because within oil and gas, we're competing with some pretty tough competition for digital resources. We're not competing just against one another. So we have time, we have time for some questions. And I literally, let's see. I don't even know. This is actually a comment, and I think it's directed toward, I'll direct it towards either one of you guys, right? And it's talking about either digital oil field or digital twins. I think it's the same. But if you're using it to audit the field, it says add in diagnostic boards and comms. Run is outside the general automation, allows the diagnostics of system as a breakout box. You have the ability to dispatch the proper piece to people based on site need, pump versus electrical other. Also, response is needed to what types. To me, I think I'm gonna take a guess, unless you have a guess at what this person is saying or asking.
I would say that, one of the tools we have been implementing at Marathon for several years now is this combination of a field service manager, task manager, where the field will tell you what's wrong with it. So I've got a frozen valve, or I've got another problem, and then the software tools will figure out who the right person to dispatch is. More importantly, these tools will prioritize. So yeah, you might have a problem at that well, but it's a 50 barrel a day well, and there's a well, 2 counties over that's 1,000 barrels a day, and you want to always go there first. So I think one of the big changes has been getting operators off of route-based work. A huge cultural change. They used to be king of the well, and now we're kind of saying, well, maybe not, and letting those tools help sift through all the data and figure out where to go use your resources with diagnostics and whatnot is certainly an increasingly large part of how we're managing our fields.
Jim, the one way we use the digital twin, sometimes we have an operational digital twin, but you have a parallel thing called for scenarios. So if you're having trouble with a compressor, for example, it may be that a control valve upstream of it is reacting too quickly, and you need to put a little bit of a lag in the control logic, because otherwise you're getting some pressure surges for a compressor. So with a scenario digital twin, they're able to test that out and see, yeah, if we put a little bit of cushion on the control valve, we can have a little smoother run operations. So sometimes guys will, an experienced operator, for example, would know that already. But if you're running this remotely, you can run with a scenario digital twin, test that out, and then if that works in the scenario model, you make that change in your operational settings. So you can test things, as you mentioned this before, you can be safer. You can test the impact of making an operational setting change, see how that works,
Okay.
and then kick it back in.
One of the questions that I had preloaded that if we didn't get enough questions was,
All right.
what do I think the largest step change that digital oilfield has brought to Marathon? And I'll tie this right back to Jim's commentary that when we use one of our tools to start managing how often you visit a well, we really changed the dynamic where the operator used to be the person deciding that, and he'd go almost every day. And we set a tool up where the operator or the supervisors started working on how often you'd go. And we got to the point where if an operator went to a well when he wasn't supposed to, he would get spoken to. And what that really changed was the entire culture dynamic of who's going to get in trouble when something bad happens on that well. And so that ability to put the true burden back on the supervisors to say, if something bad happens on that well on day 4 when you weren't out there, I'm responsible for that. The operator's not, has really tremendously changed the thought process and the cultures of their comfort level in not having to see that well every day or be blamed if something bad has happened. And that's really a direct output of having some of these digital tools to really manage where people are and see what they're doing, both to reward good behavior, but also to help correct less than good behavior. So you back, Jim?
So the next question is, we're talking about understanding the process, putting that process into data that can be managed, then responding to that data to make efficiencies and the control that is needed. There is a huge value in that. The issue you have is understanding the key data, confidence in that data, and what drives and impacts where. That is where the real expertise is needed to make required impact. Where the to be and data management only the final aspect. Would you agree?
I think one of the things you mentioned, Jim, about the little agile teams, sometimes people are too segmented. So to have a multidiscipline small team close to the asset, that would be an operational people, maintenance people, data scientists, maybe a process engineer, is going to enable quicker insights to be obtained from the data and the analytics. So you have to have confidence. You're not just reacting to a number, some sort of hypothetical reason why that number came up, but you have to understand the physical things that are going on. And these little multidiscipline teams are more powerful ways of getting to that clarity quicker.
Rick, any comment from you on that one?
Yeah, I would actually take a little bit different approach to that. From one of the things we've really been questioning lately is if we have too much data, and do we really understand when you need what data? Because it's really hard to move, 85 pieces of information on a well every 15 or 30 seconds through into computers. They then have to digest all that information and it has to be correct. So that whole value chain of moving the data, we have found is very difficult to do once, but it's very, very difficult to do it repetitively for year over year. And so do we need to start looking at some of our data and saying, hey, maybe I don't need that. So I'll go back to that tank sensor solution. Do I really care what that tank level is after I pull the load? Probably not. But do I need to keep 30-second interval tank levels for the next 20 years? Probably not. So are there ways I can start segmenting what's data I need to make critical decisions versus what is a pinpoint in time piece of information? Once that's done, maybe I just need to discard that and make the data set we're working with much smaller than right. The mindset lately has been, well, storage is cheap, so let's keep it all. And I just don't think that's necessarily the right business model going forward.
I'm right there with you on that, Rick. I agree with you. So, Dave, I'm going to throw this question at you. What do you think about real-time data operational dashboards? How they influence decision-making processes? I didn't hear anything about machine learning and AI. Are you implementing these techniques in data analytics and visualizations data? Rick,
Yeah.
I think you can touch on that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question from Adriana. And one of the things about real-time data operational dashboards, they're very valuable, used for teams to make sure that we're staying within operating limits and things like that. But sometimes they won't have the fidelity needed for some of the advanced analytics, including machine learning and AI, but they certainly will give you a heads up. So if you're using that kind of data in comparing to the theoretical results from your operating digital twin, you could see when things start to diverge, and it's a heads up of when you might need to do more advanced analytics. So the more advanced analytics, as she mentions, machine learning and AI, that stuff will come in a deeper dive that the real-time data operational dashboards might give you a heads up on. So they are both used. It's different information flows, but you get all this from the cloud data platform. And so the guys remotely, if they want to, can then run those machine learning AI type things, whereas the teams closer to it, the asset teams, may be a little more influenced by the real-time dashboards.
Okay, so I'll take a swing at that as well. I'm probably going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, actually. So Jim's heard me do that before as well. You know, real-time operational dashboards are very powerful when they're correct. Going back to my previous point of sometimes it's hard to keep them correct, and if your operational people lose confidence in them, which is very quick to happen when they look at a piece of data 4 or 5 times and they make a decision, hey, I'm going to go out and fix that, and it turns out it didn't need fixing. It creates a lack of trust in the systems very quickly, and it's very hard to win that trust back once you've lost it. So, you know, we have put a lot of effort into operational dashboards. I would say the implication of machine learning or AI is quite often just built right into that. So we've built a lot of event management tools where you're using coding to actually determine the alarm event that's going to show up on that dashboard to help the operations people know what the situation is. I think conversely, when you hear me talk about what I think is one of the next big things, automating automation, the only way that's going to work is to have near perfect field data in real time from those well pads, because you can't be adjusting the valve 50 times a day if your data is 30% of the time blanked out or wrong. And so, you know, Digital Oilfield at Marathon started on the premise that we couldn't get our data from our devices all the way into an end solution. And, you know, 5 years later, that still is arguably one of the biggest challenges, is if you can't get that 1-0 off a machine, you can't get it through your comm systems, you can't get it into your SCADA world. The end result is, all that end result investment is just gone. So the blocking and tackling of the oil patch comms and data transfer is still as important as ever.
So I know we're 2 minutes. There's one more question here. I'll take it. It says, with the increasing economic pressures causing companies to focus down on their core businesses, what opportunities do we have to still progress further into more advanced applications of machine learning? Do we see fewer data scientists or machine learning specialists being brought into the industry? And what I would say is, I don't think that there's a focus down on core businesses. I think there's a focus on how to do them differently and how to radically transform how those businesses get done. And one thing Rick doesn't say anymore that he used to say when he started this journey was, if once you've drilled a well in onshore, if you're not automated, you might as well sell. And I think that's truer today than ever before, and that's also true in offshore. So I don't think it will be fewer data scientists or machine learning specialists. I do see a higher focus on data, and so therefore I'm a believer that as a percentage of how we run our business, data scientists, machine learning specialists, data wranglers will be increasing on a percentage basis. That's world according to Jim Claunch. And Jade, we are at straight up 10 o'clock.
Hi everyone. Yeah, unfortunately that is all we have time for. Apologies there for a few technical difficulties. But thank you so much to Jim, Dave, and Rick for participating today. I'm sure you've all found their insight invaluable. The full recording will be sent to your inboxes very shortly. Please feel free to share them with your colleagues, clients, the whole community. We want to spread the knowledge as much as possible. If we have left you wanting more today, be sure to sign up to episode 2 with executives from Chevron and Equinor, who will be discussing some of the stuff that Jim has been touching on, especially with how you work remotely and how this has affected the industry for better or for worse. So to sign up, you can head to our digital library at www.upstreamintel.com/data/content library. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and of course, stay safe, everyone. Thanks very much.